between the lines. Got to read between the lines.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to join us today. Today, folks, we're going to have a bit of a smorgasbord of a show. There's not one defined topic that we're going to be on. But I wanted to sort of get us up to date on some current events that have taken place throughout the world and how this all ties into the international bankers who are orchestrating these crises and implementing their policies, and more importantly, sending your sons and daughters to bleed for their profit, and also extracting the wealth from not only the United States but also from the world. And I want to open up with a quote that if you've been watching this show, I have read this before, but I think it delivers to you the mindset of the powers to be, the people who are the dog and pony show, the puppets that are put up in front of us for us to Google at. And just absolutely be in awe of their power and their authority and their trustworthiness and all the things that go along with the deception that is unfolding before us. And the quote comes from Hermann Goebbels. And if you don't know who Hermann Goebbels was, I'm sure a lot of you do. He was an aide-de-camp, a right-hand man, if you would, for Adolf Hitler. And the quote is very significant with the mindset of these people, but not only that, also with the mechanism of the deception. Now let's listen to these words. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequence of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its power to repress dissent. For the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth becomes the greatest enemy of the state. Very interesting, because what Mr. Goebbels is telling you here is that their whole thing, they're operating on, their whole deception is based on lies. And the lies that he was speaking of back in them days had everything to do with Operation Gleitzwitz, which was the false operation where they actually had actors and they had Polish dressed soldiers. Obviously they weren't Polish soldiers, but they were in Polish uniforms, and they attacked a radio station on the border of Germany and Poland. And then of course we all know now that the Reichstag, which was the parliament building of Germany, Hitler burned that, and then was able to produce what's called the Enabling Acts, which he created the position of Führer and appointed himself Führer. So again, folks, nothing has changed from 1939 when this quote was made. It's the same modus operandi. And what they try to do from you using their education system that they control, the media that they control, the courts that they control, the policing entities that they control, either through deception or through the force of power, they have you believing this mortal enemy of the state is the lie, and they have you believing the lie. They have you to the point where we're so apathetic that we barely ask questions anymore of our government. And as Thomas Jefferson and others said in the founding era of this country, it is our duty to alter and or abolish the government should this government become suppressive to our means. Now, the first thing I want to speak of today, folks, and I'm not going to take a lot of time on this, but I just want to point out to you the audacity of the operations of the what we know as the federal government, okay? And how there's no accountability. And what I want to get into right up front here is what's called Operation Fast and Furious. And some people are calling it Operation Gunrunner, but the official name of the operation was Operation Fast and Furious. Now, if you're not familiar with this, you should be. Because even the mainstream media, even to a lesser degree, has been forced because of the pressure of the alternative media. And what I mean by that is this, folks, the mainstream media, where most of you get your information from, is losing credibility, hence losing market shares. So because the alternative media is gaining in this market share and gaining in circulation, people are turning away from the mainstream media and finding truth. And so what's happened with this is that the mainstream media has been forced to some degree to try to maintain some level of credibility, some of the topics that they normally would not speak upon or write about. And that's what this Operation Fast and Furious falls under that category. Now, what it is, folks, is that from 2009 to currently, the United States government has been dealing with Mexican drug lords, giving them automatic weapons. And what's taken place is that there's been hundreds of murders that have been accounted for through these weapons, but also now including two United States Border Patrol agents. So they have accountability of the sense that, okay, looking at it as a crime scene, we know where these weapons came from. They came from this Operation Fast and Furious. And again, now I want you to understand this. This is the United States government giving weapons to Mexican drug lords. And the reason why they said they had to do this was so they could have a trail, if you would, to see where these guns were going. Well, we obviously know where they're going. They're going to murder people. They're going to strengthen the drug cartels. Folks, do you remember that quote from Mr. Gunderson, who recently has just passed away, former FBI agent? And we had this quote on the show. We read this whole thing verbatim to you. And Mr. Gunderson was an FBI agent who was in charge of particularly the Los Angeles FBI headquarters there, and he at one time had 134 agents under him. He was one of the leading investigators of the entire FBI. So Ronald Reagan, when he became president, came up to him and said, you know, Mr. Gunderson, you're going to answer directly to me, and I want to know where this cocaine is coming from. I consider this a menace to my country. I want to be able to stop this, and here's your funds, here's your office, here's your operations, no bureaucratic chain of ladder. You are going to answer directly to me and or Al Haig, who was Secretary of State at the time. Long story short, after an 8-month investigation, Mr. Gunderson, FBI investigator, walks into President Reagan and so President Reagan says to him, "Okay, Mr. Gunderson, what can you tell me? What did you discover?" And point blankly, he said, "Mr. President, the biggest drug dealer in the world is the United States government." And what he was talking about at that point was the smuggling of the cocaine and other things into the United States of America. And of course, a lot of this turned into Iran-Contra and so forth, and I don't have the time to get into all of Iran-Contra, but basically the CIA was caught red-handed. One of their planes crashed, and it was loaded with tons and tons of cocaine. All right, and there's a lot of evidence to go along with this. Look what's going on in Afghanistan currently. If you go to the website whatreallyhappened.com and they have a bunch of subtitles you can go to, and I believe it's Why Our Children Are Dying in Afghanistan or something along that line. Punch in Afghanistan or click on Afghanistan, and you will see U.S. Marines and U.S. Army soldiers not only protecting the poppy fields, but actually collecting and processing the poppy to create the heroin that comes to this country, that fortifies all the black ops operations. So basically, folks, this Operation Fast and Furious is just a continuation of black op operations that are geared not only for profit for these agencies and for these private banks that have to wash the money, Wachovia Bank, Bank of America. A lot of these banks have been, go on the internet and just Google Bank of Wachovia and washing drug money. You'd be shocked at what you're going to read, folks. All these major banks are part of the system because it's all controlled by the international banksters. All right? And they're laundering the money through these high volume banking institutions, all right? There's people that are brilliant at hiding numbers or guising numbers, all right? And this is basically what's going on. So this Operation Fast and Furious was all part of this. They were bringing down guns, giving them to Mexican drug lords. Now, ironically enough, the mainstream media last week comes out and says, well, this is a wonderful thing that they did this because they were able to determine that Iran was about ready to attack the United States. I don't know who writes this stuff, who makes this stuff up, folks, but that's exactly what they're saying. See, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that the United States government has been supplementing Mexican drug lords with automatic weapons because we have discovered a threat from the country of Iran. Again, hilarious stuff. If you want to understand the lies and how they, again, make us believe these lies, and there's never any accountability. So let's get into this. The undercover operation carried out by the Bureau of Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. And now, folks, this article is actually 3 weeks old. Now the FBI has been linked to this operation also, okay? Which intentionally allowed large numbers of firearms to be brought into the Mexican country by so-called straw purchases and then sent across the border to Mexico's drug cartels known as Operation Fast and Furious. Basically, folks, I'm not going to get into the verbatim article of this. They get into some of the murders of Agent Jamie Zapata in Mexico and Border Agent Brian Terry in Arizona. Folks, the Mexican cartel drug lords are actually coming over the border of the United States in Mexico into the United States in military fashion. You know, it's ironic that we can have thousands of troops, 30,000 troops on the border of Korea since 1952, in Germany and so forth. We're actually in 151 nations right now militarily, but we cannot protect our own border. We can't take 4,000 troops and put them on our own border. It's amazing. And this isn't the first time the United States government's been captured doing this. If you want to do some research, go back into the Clinton administration when they were caught giving 8 automatic AK-47s to Chinese gang lords in Los Angeles and on the West Coast. Go ahead and research it. Folks, I'm not making this stuff up. If I had this kind of imagination, I'd be a retired author by now. I would just make a series of books and call it a day. This is reality. This is the reality of what this insolvent corporation that you call the United States government is doing. So we've got 2 agents that are murdered by weapons supplemented to, supplied to Mexican drug lords in the United States. Think of that, in the United States. Okay, now this is a little bit of a spin on it. Operation Gunrunner has been a rather dismal failure overall, as very few of the weapons allowed to be smuggled into Mexico have actually been recovered. Now see how they spin this? So let me see if I got this right. They gave these guns to Mexican drug lords so they could be recovered? So the operation has been a failure because they couldn't recover them? Think of this. I mean, this is nonsense. Okay? They also get into, in this article, how Homeland Security denied any involvement or knowledge of the operation. Napolitano had no knowledge of the operation. And a few days ago, I have a note here, President Obama did an interview with a reporter called Jorge Ramos of Univision, in which he claimed that neither he nor Attorney General Eric Holder authorized the operation. Now, this is Obama speaking. Listen to this. Well, first of all, I did not authorize it. Eric Holder, the Attorney General, did not authorize it. He's been very clear that our policy is to catch gun runners and put them into jail. So what he's done is he's assigned an IG, an Inspector General, to investigate exactly what happened. When Ramos asked Obama if he was at least informed about Operation Gunrunner, Obama responded, absolutely not. This is a pretty big government, the United States government. I got a lot of moving parts. So what he's telling you folks is that the President of the United States has admittedly saying that he has no idea of what his entities below him that he's responsible for are doing. Think of that. If you were a private businessman and someone that you put in charge to run a corporation had no understanding of what, especially something as dramatic as this, did not know what the daily operations of that corporation was that was going on, how long do you think he'd keep his job? And how can you sit there and really believe that the Attorney General of the United States, the Homeland Secretary, Napolitano, did not know of this operation? Who authorized this operation then? Is this going to be another Colonel North thing with Iran-Contra? You know, the buck stopped at Colonel North. They threw him to the wolves, and so be it. He was the fall guy. But think about what President Obama is telling you. He really doesn't know the operations of his insolvent corporation. Really incredible when you think about it. So let's go a little deeper into this. This is a later article. This is about 2 weeks ago. At least 122 weapons were used to commit crimes in Mexico that have been linked to Operation Fast and Furious, the blotched ATF effort to track weapons sold to gun runners, according to a congressional report released this past Tuesday. The New York Times, wow. Think of that, folks. The New York Times is now speaking of this. Of course, this has been out for 6 months. People who were paying attention to the alternative media knew about this operation 6 months ago. But again, we are forcing the New York Times to put this in their paper. I guarantee you it wasn't on page 1. But the New York Times reports that details of the congressional investigators' findings show that on at least 48 occasions between 2009 and 2011, Mexican authorities have found weapons from the U.S. operation. The newspaper quotes emails from the tobacco of firearms and explosives. The ATF ultimately was responsible for the operation. The report was compiled by staffs of Representative Darrell Issa of California and Senators Charles E. Grassley of Iowa. Again, folks, these are the congressmen and senator who have been investigating this. The faulty design of Operation Fast and Furious led to tragic consequences, the ATF report concludes. Countless United States and Mexican citizens suffered as a result. Oh, we ran afoul. We just messed up again. Oh my, we're so inadequate. Now we need more funding because we don't have enough funding to do this. It reminds me of when after 9/11, what took place. DOD, CIA, ASA, NSA, all these intelligence committees and entities were all, what happened? 19 hijackers and the whole facade, if you want to believe the official story of 9/11. Well, what happened? Was there anybody prosecuted, anybody fired? No, what happened? They needed more money for their budgets. They were all rewarded with budget benefits. Think of that. Nobody went to prison nobody was held accountable for 9/11. Of course, it was a complete inside job. But no one even in the facade that they sell the public was held accountable for the events and failures of protecting the American people on 9/11. All their benefits were, all of their beneficiaries with regards to their programs, their funding, their equipment, their personnel, they were all rewarded. Every one of them. Okay? So this is a blotched operation. We didn't do this on purpose. Folks, this went on for a year and a half before anyone even discovered it. Okay? Do you think they would have come out with this if it wasn't discovered by entities that went public with it? No, it would still be going on. The findings also detail the deaths of the brother of a Mexican law enforcement official and several other deaths involving Mexican police helicopters that purport to have ties to Fast and Furious guns. However, these incidents have no guns directly linked to the operation. How do you like that? So we say it's not true, so it's not true, but we have plenty of proof that it is true. Okay, this is another, this is put out by Newsmax.com. Operation Fast and Furious is a U.S. Department of Justice. Oh, wait a minute, the DOJ is involved now. But Eric Holder had no knowledge of this. Effort conducted by its Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, in Phoenix, Arizona. The operation was designed to snare Mexican drug cartels' big fish by permitting the sale of firearms of various calibers, to straw purchasers who then attempt to ship the weapons to the cartels of other Mexican criminals. Folks, talk about a play on words. The ATF is meeting with these people directly and giving them firearms. What a play on words. So are they trying to give you the guys here that the ATF really didn't know what was going on with the weapons once their straw purchasers had them? Prosecution was the original endgame, ha ha ha. But at some point along the way, again, just by flagrant error, DOJ and ATF supervisors instructed Fast and Furious operations to continue surveillance, including wiretaps of straw purchasers, but ceased to interdictions. Interdiction, folks, and I have a word here, arrest. So in other words, okay, we're going to give them everything. We're going to know that they have. We're going to monitor it. We're going to make sure they get the guns. But after that, there's no more accountability, and we're not going to arrest anybody that's getting the guns. Interesting. Thus, the weapons went south literally and figuratively, and things went terribly wrong. According to Mexican officials, at least 500 Mexican nationals have been killed, with an estimated over 2,500 weapons sold to Mexican drug lords. Illegal transfers of the weapons to Mexico apparently were conducted without the knowledge of Mexican authorities, who expressed outrage at the mounting deaths. I'm sure they did, folks. This is like that fake wrestling, WT, whatever they have it. I forget what it is now. They all beat each other up in front of you for the dog and pony show, then go out to have dinner with each other after it's all over. Also, U.S. citizens have been killed. For example, on December 14, 2010, U.S. Border Agent Brian Terry was murdered 18 miles into the United States. At least 2 Fast and Furious weapons were found at that crime scene. Folks, I can go on about this. There's a lot of time, but I don't want to get involved too much with time. But interesting enough, locally, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Patrick Leahy and some other Democrats on the House Oversight Committee have been stonewalling the investigation. And I'm not surprised by that. I mean, they're protecting their man, their president. But of course, the president knew nothing of it, so why would they do that, right? So anyway, I'm not going to go on much more with this, but I do want to continue with some of the repercussions of Fast and Furious besides the deaths. Doing some legal research at a website I go to, I found an interesting legal document, and it took me into this thing called the narcosphere. And it's very interesting, but I'm just going to read it verbatim to you. Now listen to this. Court documents claim Sinaloa cartel is protected by the U.S. government. That's the headline that caught my attention. Okay? Now listen to this. The son of a heavy hitter in a powerful Mexican drug trafficking organization has filed explosive legal pleadings in federal court in Chicago, accusing the U.S. government of cutting a dealing with the Sinaloa cartel that gave its leadership carte blanche to continuing smuggling tons of illicit drugs and arms into the Chicago area and the rest of the United States. The source of this allegation is Jesus Vicente Zambada Nabella, the son of Ismael Elmeo Zambada Garcia, one of the purported top leaders of the Sinaloa drug trafficking organization, a major Mexican-based importer of drugs and weapons. The top capo of the Sinaloa drug organization, named after the Pacific Coast Mexican state where it is based, is Joaquin Guzman Lolero, and I guess his nickname is El Chapo, who escaped from a maximum security prison in Mexico in 2001, only days before he was slated to be extradited to the United States. Chapo has since gone on to build one of the most powerful drug cartels in all of Mexico, and with the death of Osama bin Laden in May, Chapo was a Spanish nickname meaning shorty, jumped to the top of the FBI's most wanted persons list. Folks, that's really interesting because Osama bin Forgotten was not at the top of the FBI's most wanted list. We covered that on the show. We read this to you verbatim, that Osama bin Laden was 4th on the list, and he was not wanted for the crimes of 9/11. He was wanted for the bombing of an embassy in Sudan. Very interesting. But anyway, folks, here you have in federal court, you have witness testimony. This is explosive, that an insider, one of the top pins of the Sinaloa cartel, which is one of the most powerful drug exporting and weapon importing to the United States people, is telling you in court documentation that the United States government is not only working with them, but protecting this cartel. Very interesting. And when you go on, folks, you're going to see that this cartel was one of the main players of Operation Fast and Furious. Very interesting. Okay, one more thing about Fast and Furious. I want to just get into who the fall guy is going to turn out to be, the Ollie North of Fast and Furious. And this is an article written from the American Free Press. And I'm not going to do the whole article with you for time restraints, but let me just skim through this quick. 2 top U.S. officials have now been forced out of their positions as a result of the congressional investigation into Operation Fast and Furious, a U.S. operation that had law enforcement looking the other way. Oh, yeah, they didn't have law enforcement looking the other way. They were giving them the guns. They were looking right in front of them. As Mexican drug gangs purchased guns in the United States and smuggled them into Mexico, the mainstream media was largely dismissive of the scale of these official programs. Again, I'm going to be real quick with this. Just before the ATF, Justice Department officials announced that the stand-in director for the Bureau of Tobacco, Alcohol, Firearms, and Explosives, Ken Melson, has been reassigned at the Justice Department's headquarters in Washington. Shortly before that, Dennis Burke, the U.S. Attorney in Phoenix, the scene of the federal government's fast and furious gun-running crime, announced that he would be resigning from his post. Well, isn't this interesting? This is this has Americans wondering if Attorney General Eric Holder's head will be next to roll. Well, how could it be? President Obama has already said he had no knowledge of this, even though this was his entity, his operation he's responsible for. Okay, but I'm not going to read the whole thing again. In another joint investigation hearing on July 4th, Melson testified that he became sick to his stomach upon learning the full story of the operation and saw that he was becoming the fall guy, when in truth, the orders for the illegal operation that provided over 2,500 high-powered weapons to Mexican drug cartels came from much higher up in the chain of command, said Melson. Well, interesting enough, so we found out who the fall guy is, this Agent Melson, but now Agent Melson is telling you that what? That this whole, he was just merely taking his marching orders, all right? Ken Melson, who was in charge of it locally, on the ground, if you would, was just taking his marching orders from his superiors. And knowing that there is a chain of command, who are we looking at here? Eric Holder. Who is Eric Holder's superior officer? President Obama. But yet they both deny they had any knowledge of this operation. Folks, this is nothing new. This happens all the time. You know, I mean, look what's going on in the United States since we've been in Afghanistan with heroin. I know most people have a hard time believing this, but folks, believe it or not, the Taliban in Afghanistan, before we invaded that country, for 14 years, they outlawed the growing of poppy. It was against their religious beliefs. So what is the second area that when we went into Afghanistan that we protected and funded the farmers? It's called the Golden Crescent. It's the #1 area in the entire world to produce the poppy that produces the heroin. Very interesting. But again, when you look at the Vietnam War, there was the Golden Triangle, the second biggest area in the world to grow the poppy. And we had operations running out of there. If you want to look into that, folks, I ask you to look into the CIA and heroin operations in the 70s through Southeast Asia, and into the 60s also, 60s and 70s, and look up different entities from the CIA that you will see, Air America and so forth, that were involved in the production, the protection, and the smuggling of heroin into the United States. Okay, so enough of the dirty work of Operation Fast and Furious. There's a lot of things, other things going on, folks, that I want to discuss with you today. And one of the things has to do with what's going on with this Occupy Wall Street. I think it's a wonderful idea. I'm taking this as a good thing. Gerald Celente, who is someone I pay attention to, has sent a lot of his people at these different gatherings all the way from Portland, Maine to Arizona to New York down to South Carolina and so forth. And the one common thing that he's come back with for all his research that he's done is, #1, there is an awakening coming. The awakening is taking place, and this is a manifestation of the awakening. Do I agree with all these people's demands, and do I agree with their whole mindset of why they're all there? No, I don't. But I do agree with them, #1, and I give them credit that they've gotten off the couch. You know, my generation, when I was younger, we took to the streets protesting the Vietnam War and some other things because we thought it was wrong. And one of the things that I've been discouraged about the younger people today is that they don't get off the couch. They don't get active in what's going on in their lives. And I know that's part of being young. There's more entertaining things to do when you're younger. But at least now the younger people are starting to get off the couch. And the thing that I am impressed about is that they understand the target. It's one thing to understand there's a war being waged against you when the average American has no understanding that there is a war being waged against us. But to understand the war and to understand the target to defeat your enemy or expose your enemy is very, very important, and to me it's a good sign. And here's why. When you look at the riots that took place in Greece and so forth, a lot of them, and the vast majority of them, were directed at government buildings, banks, and broker houses, share houses. Okay? And when you look at in England, when the riots took place, they would just want them. There was no specific targets. It was neighborhoods. There was no specific targets venting their energy to. It was just an act of violence and ignorance. Okay? And so a lot of the people, they've gone and they've occupied what? They've sat in front of what? Federal Reserve banks throughout the country. This, to me, is a very powerful message that the education efforts of people like myself and people behind the camera and people throughout the country and the world, for that matter, are starting to pay off. Do you remember we read that quote about 3 or 4 weeks ago that Hillary Clinton said about 2 months ago, and that was, this is Hillary Clinton speaking to the Council on Foreign Relations now, that there is an information war going on and we are losing that war. I could not agree with her more. Matter of fact, it's one of the few times I've ever agreed with Hillary Clinton. They are losing the war, folks. We are gaining in the war, and this manifestation of this Occupy Wall Street is a big indicator to me that yes, the education war is going our way. And don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of deception out there, and there's still plenty of people that are completely gullible and completely entrenched in the system of believing that they're being told the truth. But there's more and more people who are waking up and who are looking for answers to some very pertinent questions. And young people today are finding out that they've been lied to. And they're finding out that their future has been sold. Their future's been sold. So when they're targeting areas like Wall Street, the big banks, and the Federal Reserve entities throughout the country, I am very, very happy about that. And I wish them the best. I mean, there's even small protest here in St. Johnsbury, you know, and I applaud them, folks. That's awesome what they're doing. And I know that it's going to continue. And the other thing that has shown this is the force of what's going on with the police, particularly in New York and Washington, D.C., and some other places. The police have been instigators. They've been brutal. If you got on the internet and you watched any of the footage, I mean, you know, I thought we had the right as human beings to gather peacefully and protest and petition. Evidently, we don't. By the way, do you have a permit from the very people that you're protesting against and about? You have to go get permission from them to gather oneself and peacefully protest and expose the world to their crimes? You got to get a permission from them to do that? And you'll only do it in this protest zone? I mean, incrementally, folks, they're taking away our right of protest and petition. So, let's continue with some more quotes here. And this one particular quote I know you've heard before also, but I just think that it's from John Maynard Keynes, and I just think it really hits home with a lot of what's going on today. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch its currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does so in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Again, deception. Well, folks, I think that 1 man in a million has changed. I think percentage-wise, we're at the point now where many more people have been able, as John Maynard Keynes said, to diagnose, to have an understanding of the mechanics of our money system and or lack of. Okay, this is Horace Greeley. He was the founder, folks, of a very prominent newspaper earlier called the New York Tribune. We have stricken the slave shackles from 4 million human beings and brought all laborers to a common level, not so much by the elevation of former slaves as by practically reducing the whole working population, white and black, to a condition of serfdom. While boasting of our noble deeds, we are careful to conceal the ugly fact that by an egregious money system, we have nationalized a system of oppression which, though more refined, is not less cruel than the old system of chattel slavery. Very interesting quote. Here's another quote, and I'll be quick with it. I've read this before too. One day we did a show on this book. This is Professor Carroll Quigley in his book, Tragedy and Hope. And the powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in the private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at infrequent meetings and conferences. The apex of the systems was to be the Bank for the International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank sought to dominate its governments by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country itself, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. What's he telling you? This is amazing. Number one, he's telling you they're paying off all the politicians. Understand that. He's telling you point-blank language that to influence and cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. That's a payoff. But he's also telling you, folks, that all of these central banks, and we got into this on another show, we talked about the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. They were all faltering, all going in default. They all had to have their more money, more bailouts for these bankers. Well, what was the only common denominator out of all these countries? It wasn't culture, it wasn't history, it was nothing. What was it? The only common denominator was they were all controlled by these private corporation central banks that are the apex of the system is the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Now, if you watched the show the last 2 weeks, 2 and 3 weeks ago, we got into the birth certificate again. And we mechanically demonstrated to you how to look up your bond on the internet and find its value. Okay? But when we got to the top of the apex, folks, of where your bond winds up, where was it? It was the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. That's not just by happen chance, folks, I can assure you. Okay, another quote. This is Taylor Caldwell, The Devil's Advocate. Very interesting book, 1952. On the day when you again allow abominable men to confiscate your freedom, your money, your lives, your private property, your manhood, and your sacred honor, in the name of security or national emergency, you will die, and never again shall you be free. If plotters destroy your republic, they will do it by your greedy and ignorant apathetic assent, by your disregard of your neighbor's rights, by your apathy and your stupidity. We were brought to the brink of universal death and darkness because we had become the most contemptible of people, an angerless one. Keep alive and vivid all your righteous anger against traitors, against those who would abrogate your constitution, against those who would lead you to wars with false slogans and cunning appeals to your patriotism. That, my friends, is an awesome statement. When I first read this, I had to just keep this for myself because I just feel this guy has got it right on the money. Have they confiscated your freedom? Yes, they have. There's nothing you can't do without paying them and getting permission to do it. And I want you to think of this. Can you go get a job without filling out their private banker's IRS paperwork? Can you go and their social security number? Do you have any money? No, if you've been watching this program, you understand that we do not have money. We have legal tender because money does not encompass instruments of debt. And we work for Federal Reserve notes. We looked up the word note on our Black's Law Dictionary, an acknowledgement of debt. So we do not have money. That's gone. Your lives? Do you live freely under your own dictates? And as long as you don't hurt the property or the well-being of another, live freely? Absolutely not. Your private property, as we've gotten into you before, you do not own your property. We read that to you verbatim. All property is in the state. We read that verbatim to you from the bankruptcy papers of March 9th, 1933. You do not own your property. And, of course, you just had to pay your extortion fee called property taxes because you do not own your property. I know that them property taxes, boy, they hurt me dramatically every year. Every year they go up without any services being added. It's incredible. Your manhood, well, and your sacred honor. Folks, if you can look at yourself in the mirror and be satisfied that you're doing enough to educate your fellow man, to look out for your fellow man, and to understand your sacred honor, then okay, they haven't took your manhood yet. But if you're looking in the mirror and saying, gee, maybe I could do just a little bit more. Maybe I could get off the couch and do my own research. After all, I've got the internet now. I don't have to go out and spend $300, no exaggeration, for a book like I did years and years ago. All right? So this one's on you. You can ask yourself by looking in the mirror what you're doing for the good of your fellow man, your family, and the future of your nation. That will determine where is your manhood. Okay, so let me start. I just thought that this quote was just fantastic, and I agree with him. I agree with Mr. Caldwell wholeheartedly that they have taken everything that we believe we are free about. So now I want to get into a little bit of the mechanics of this, well, and some quotes about the mechanics. And this is a quote from Robert H. Hemphill. He was the credit manager of the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. And I thought this was an awesome quote, and I think he is writing this not in a booklet that I know of. I think he's writing this privately. But listen to this. Again, now this man is the credit manager of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Georgia, probably the third most influential bank in the Federal Reserve banking system. This is a staggering thought. We are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. We are absolutely without a permanent money system. When one gets a complete grasp of the picture, the tragic absurdity of our hopeless position is almost incredible. But there it is. It is the most important subject intelligent persons can investigate and reflect upon. It is so important that our present civilization may collapse unless it becomes widely understood and the defects remedied very soon. Now you would think a person who is the credit manager of one of the most influential and important banks in the entire world would have some good insight of not only the mechanics of the system, but also of the results of where we are going and where we are. How many times, folks, when you read the newspaper now, are you hearing a reference to the word collapse? Understand it. History is a good barometer, and I really believe that history does repeat itself unless we get involved, unless we educate ourselves and alter the means where we do not follow this, go down the same path. Here's another quote. This is Louis T. McFadden, a congressman. And if you've been watching this show, we have studied Mr. McFadden quite well. We come to the understanding that he was poisoned to death on the third attempt, and he wrote quite extensively. He was the chairman of the House Coin and Currency Commission way back in the early 1900s, so he had a good understanding of what the Federal Reserve was all about. And I want to read this quote from him. This is, again, Congressman Louis T. McFadden. The Federal Reserve is one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever seen. There is not a man within the sound of my voice who does not know that this nation is run by international bankers. Folks, this is from the Congressional Record. He was speaking to the House of Representatives in 1916. The Federal Reserve is one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever seen. There is not a man within the sound of my voice who does not know that this nation is run by international bankers. That's 1916, folks. Where do you think we are in 2011? Ralph M. Hawtrey, former Secretary of the British Treasury. I want to talk about the mechanics a little bit. I think this quote sums it up quite well. Banks lend by creating credit. They create the means of payment out of nothing. Think of that, folks. You labor, you work. All they do is make an entry on a ledger, and we have to pay them an interest bond on every Federal Reserve note in your pocket because they gave us permission to print it in the first place. Amazing. This is where we are. When we get into, basically, we got into the 28.3 trillion from the bailout, and we're going to get into that real quick, because at the bailout, folks, we're going to find out there was a partial audit done, and we're going to find out where some of that money went to. Yes, I don't think you're going to be surprised where the money went to, but I can tell you one thing, it didn't go to me or you. But I can tell you who's going to be liable for all the interest bond due on it and the original loan, me and you. The Federal Reserve, the system of banking is a blot left in our constitutions which, if not covered, will end in its destruction. I sincerely believe that banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by its prosperity is but swindling fertility on a large scale. President Thomas Jefferson. Okay, I'm going to just read this last one from Thomas Edison, and then I think we'll call it a day. Actually, let's get into a little bit more about, this is Major L.L. Bang Angus. He was also a member of the Bank of England. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banks can, in fact, inflate, mint, and unmint the modern ledger entry currency. What did I tell you? All they do is make an entry on a ledger, and they give us permission to print it, and we have to pay them because they gave us permission. And what did Major Angus say? The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banks can, in fact, inflate, mint, unmint the modern ledger entry currency. Okay, this is an interesting quote from Thomas Edison. People who will neither turn a shovel full of dirt on the project, he was talking about the Muscle Shoals Dam, which is down south, nor contribute a pound of material, will collect more money from the United States than will the people who supply all the material and do all the work. This is the terrible thing about interest, but here it is the point. If the nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The element that makes the bond good makes the bill good also. The difference between the bond and the bill is that the bond lets the money broker collect twice the amount of the bond, an additional 20%. Are you with me on that? You're not the one collecting here, folks. You're the one paying out. Whereas the currency, the honest sort provided by the Constitution, which we do not have anymore, pays nobody but those who contribute in some useful way. It is absurd to say that our country can issue bonds and cannot issue currency. Both are promises to pay, but one fattens the usurer and the other helps the people. If the currency issued by the people were no good, then the bonds would be no good either. It is a terrible situation when the government, to ensure national wealth, must go into debt and submit to a ruinous interest charges at the hands of men who control the fictitious value of our money. Interest is the invention of Satan. Thomas Edison. The man not only knew a little bit about science, he also had a good understanding of the money system. Okay. Some important quotes here. Now I want to get into a little bit about, as I said to you earlier, the basically there was a partial audit done of some of the ledgers of the Federal Reserve. I know you have not seen this on the mainstream media because the mainstream media, folks, is controlled by these very same entities. But what took place, and I'm not going to read this whole thing verbatim because of time constraints, but I want to get to the meat and potatoes of this, okay? This was the partial first ever Government Accountability Office audit, and basically, I'm happy to say, Congressman Sanders, Senator Sanders, my apologies, was very useful and very much part of this process. I know that if you get on the internet and you can watch on YouTube, you can watch Ben Bernanke, Senator Sanders asked Ben Bernanke, "Are you going to tell the American people where the money went?" He was talking about the top funds, the bailout or the takeover bill, as I call it. And Ben Bernanke just looks at him matter-of-factly and says, "No. No, I'm not." Well, Mr. Sanders and some others got together, including Ron Paul and so forth, got together and with what leverage they had, were able to do a partial audit of some of the top funds, not all, but some of the top funds. And this is the first time, folks, in a 100-year history that this has actually taken place. So I applaud Ms. Senator Sanders and Mr. Ron Paul and some others who were very instrumental in putting this together. And what they discovered, you may think was shocking. I'll be honest with you, I'm sure this rabbit hole is going to go a lot deeper. But not only did the banking cronies of the United States gain plenty of money from this, the money, your labors, were distributed throughout the world. Now, this should have been on every front page of every newspaper in the entire world. Listen to this. There was 131 organizations that received money from the top funds. Okay? And you know, somewhere in this article, folks, there is a value of how much this was put out into there were $2.3 trillion, folks. The same amount of money that was missing from the Pentagon on September 10th. $2.3 trillion were put out literally in bonuses to these people. Okay? Now listen to this. 131. I'm not going to go through the whole list of all of them. I just want to give you some frequent names and some names that you will recognize and some numbers that will just shock you. Now, this money was given to these organizations, folks. There is no payback. The payback's coming from your labors, from your children, forever, forever. You can't pay this. This is more than the gross domestic product of the United States. Okay, here we go. Citigroup. Now, again, this is a partial audit. This is not even a full-page audit. And, folks, if this is what they're admitting to and this is what they couldn't hide from the auditors, imagine how much they really got. This is what they were able to trickle it down to. Citigroup, $2.5 trillion. Morgan Stanley, $2.04 trillion. Merrill Lynch, $1.949 trillion. Bank of America, $1.344 trillion. Barclays PLC, United Kingdom, $868 billion. Bear Stearns, $853 billion. Goldman Sachs, $814 billion. Royal Bank of Scotland, $541 billion. JP Morgan Chase, $391 billion. Deutsche Bank of Germany, $354 billion. UBS, which is the National Bank of Switzerland, $287 billion. Credit Suisse, Switzerland again, $262 billion. Lehman Brothers, $183 billion. Bank of Scotland, United Kingdom, $181 billion. BNP Paribas, that is a major bank in France, $175 billion. Folks, I quit after $175 billion. Think of this. This is the top funds. This is where your money went. So remember, this was to save the economy. How's the economy doing? How's your economy doing? Now, my dear friends, there is another bailout coming. And this bailout, I'm just going to read this headlines from the American Free Press again. International bankers demand Federal Reserve to save foreign institutions. The heads of the world's leading central banks announced in a joint statement, oh, imagine that, they all got together and agreed on something. They all got together and agreed on September 15th that in order to quell concerns about a deepening of the global economic crisis, the privately owned and controlled U.S. Federal Reserve would have to flood the upper tier of the world's financial system with even more U.S. dollars by providing unlimited U.S. dollar liquidity to any financial institution around the world. Folks, they are bleeding us. And where is it going? Billions and trillions of dollars are going to their crony friends. And think of this. They created this crisis. They made money all the way up. Then they're making money all the way down. Because we're bailing them out, if you want to fall for the deception, we're paying them at full value of their assets. And I want you to think about this. If your company is faltering, is failing, and you're just going to circle the wagons and you're going to liquidate everything you can and sell what you can, are you going to be able to get full value, 100% value of that faltering entity? Absolutely not. But why did we pay all these bankers trillions, $28.3 trillion in full 100% value of that commodity? Because after all, they were falling. We couldn't allow them to collapse. It's basic economics. We should have got it for a cheaper bang on the buck, but we didn't. We paid them their asking price, better known as their demand price, because they demand it. Folks, we are at a juncture right now where we are lending out, we don't have money. Every Federal Reserve note that you know is $1 that's in your pocket, there's an interest bond due on it. Okay? They are extracting your labors through a fiat currency system. And what I mean by that is, in Europe right now, the average European is paying between 71 and 76% of his or her earnings into taxes. Right now in the United States, the average American is paying between 56 and 58% of his or her earnings to taxes. That does not include the cost of doing business, which winds up on the price of anything that you're going to buy. I'm just talking taxes, accountable taxes. Okay? So if you're almost up to 60% of your earnings, which represent your labor units, your labor, it's a mathematical equation. It's very simple. This 60% represents 60% of your time laboring to acquire these funds, this legal tender, this fiat entity. So 60% of your labor is being squandered and being given to international bankers who have created this system and created this crisis, who are sending your sons and daughters to bleed in foreign wars. I got a big kick out of it. They announced, well, you know, the war in Iraq is over. I think it's the fourth time they announced it. But the war in Iraq is over. We're going to bring all the troops home. Folks, we got 140,000 mercenaries that you know as contractors in the country of Iraq. So if all these military entities are going to be freed up, where are we going next? Folks, you have got to understand the times and where we're at here. History repeats itself, and we are on our way to the word that you've been reading so much and hearing so much about in the last 6 months, and that word is collapse. Doesn't have to be. We can get off the couch and like Iceland did. You ever notice you don't hear about Iceland no more? All you heard about Iceland is they were going in default. They had to pay the bankers, Well, the people voted and said, no, we're not going to pay you. We do not owe this. You don't hear about Iceland no more, do you? You know why, folks? Because they're doing just fine without him. Just fine without him. Just as Gaddafi was doing just fine without him. You know, we covered this in the show before they even went into Libya. You know, Gaddafi, you got $1,200 a month from oil revenue, every citizen. He developed the best aquifer in the world. Free education for all the way up to 6 years of college. I'm not saying he was a great man, but I will tell you this. If you got beyond the deception of the mainstream media, you would find out that things were not the way they were portrayed to you. And when I said to my friends and colleagues, I said, when he wanted to have all his oil paid in intrinsic value, gold and or silver, I said that's the end of it for him. Because the bankers were not going to allow an intrinsic valued medium of exchange on any market. Because everybody would flock to it and their game would be exposed for what it is. Folks, with that being said, as always, we are very, very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to join us. We hope you've enjoyed the show. And as always, in closing, we remind you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.
Got the